everyone. We're here this week with Jen. Jen is a really good friend of mine. Her and I are very similar in lots of ways. And today we're going to talk all about independent work. And I know this is something that I feel like I've been getting a lot more questions about lately as we are now really settled into the school year. Maybe starting to feel like we've gotten a groove going after breaks and all the things. So before we jump into all the things independent work, because I know Jen and I are going to talk about this forever, I'm going to let Jen go ahead and introduce herself and tell us a little bit about who you are and your years of experience in the field.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to be here. So my name is Jen Adams. I have been teaching for, I think it's 16 years now. I've dabbled in a little bit of everything. I started my career in elementary and early childhood education. And then after a few years of that, went back, got my master's in special ed, and then taught for the majority of my career in special ed, self-contained in a middle school classroom in brick and mortar. And then a few years back, started working for a virtual school and teaching the same thing, self-contained autistic support. And then in the last year or so, I've transitioned as a special education instructional coach, supporting teachers in self-contained and special ed programs at the same virtual school.
Yeah, so you've had lots of different experience, helped a lot of different rooms and classrooms as you were a teacher, and now you are really supporting a lot of different types of rooms, especially virtually. I'm sure that comes with its own unique challenges. As we talk about independent work, I'll have you give suggestions and tips for in class and also online and what that could look like. So for those that might not be as familiar, what do you feel is independent work and what does that actually look like?
So independent work is something that I think a lot of special ed and especially self-contained classrooms talk about and implement in their classrooms. But if we're being honest, independent work is anything that any student can do independently on their own. So this can be in a general education classroom. If you walk in and you see, students completing a worksheet and the teacher's at their desk doing something else, maybe grading or working with another group of students, and those other students in the back working on that worksheet are doing it on their own without any other assistance, that's independent work. So it doesn't just have to be special education, but I do think self-contained classrooms kind of take it to a whole other level, because a lot of times students in those classrooms are lacking the skills to work independently. So that is why many teachers want to implement, a system working on things more independently for their students. So that is where you see that independent work station set up in a classroom, which is typically some kind of a table or desk with some activities for the student to go over, complete. And there's an entire process involved with it with many steps, and it's pretty procedural based in those types of settings.
Yeah, I know you had talked about a teacher sitting at their desk to do grading or something of that sort. Should teachers feel guilty for doing things like this and like basically not teaching because they're just letting their kids work?
No, because we need to look at the bigger picture. And anytime we're working with students in the classroom, we're preparing them for outside of the classroom. So if you think about this, when you're in your job, do you need someone constantly standing over you, telling you what to do every second of the day? If so, you're not very independent in doing that. So if we're not creating that type of environment for our students in the classroom, we're not setting them up for their future as well outside of it.
Yeah, so you really have to think of the big picture. I agree. Because there is a lot of guilt that could be like, oh, we could be doing something else right now, but instead, like you really are working on work endurance, the students' confidence in their own working abilities, problem solving, willing to ask for help if they do need help, and helping them troubleshoot from there. So I feel like there's such benefits to independent work that teachers should not feel guilty. So, what are some of your favorite activities that you like to use for independent work?
So a lot of times I would start off with students, just needing to get going with the independent work systems in my classroom. So when I taught in self-contained autistic support, I had a set of shelves that had bins in them that had different materials. And a lot of those activities were skills that my students already knew how to do. So the biggest thing is to create that independence for students. You need to make sure the tasks that you're giving them are ones that they can already do on their own. It should not be new
Mhm.
material. It should not be material that are on their IEP goals that they're working on. It needs to be skills they've already mastered and know how to do, because our goal is not, can they match letters on a file folder, or is it's not about if they can, put shapes into a container. It's more about that endurance and that ability to work on any type of
Mhm.
activity on their own. So that was really what I looked at. I would look at my kids' abilities in the classroom and figure out what skills they could do already on their own. And those were the activities that I typically added in. A lot of times, file folders, task cards were some of my favorites because you could find them on any skill.
Mhm.
Also, things like maybe adapted books were nice for the students to do. Puzzles also were pretty easy ones that you could find and just put in to some of those bins. And then I would get creative from time to time and just find things in my classroom, like putting erasers on pencils and things like that,
Mhm.
that, you could easily take from supplies you had already.
Yeah, I love your idea of like it is already previously mastered tasks. So it should be for skill maintenance, or promoting fine motor skills, even just like you said, the pencils,
Mhm.
erasers on the pencils. Like anything could be an independent work as long as the student can independently participate and complete that task as independently as possible, right? For sure. I think a lot of the times too, I hear questions about like the physical space that teachers don't have space for 400 bins to be set up, or like what does that physical space look like when you are setting it up for a classroom?
Yeah. So, like I had mentioned earlier, I was lucky enough to have a built-in bookshelf in my classroom that I was able to dedicate to putting a lot of my bins into. And I will say that's where I started year one. So my biggest suggestion there is start small.
Mhm.
Do not feel like you need to have hundreds of tasks already ready to go to use in your system. Depending on how many students you have in your classroom, you could have like 5 tasks per kid for them to work on, and that would probably be plenty to get
Mhm.
started in your room. And they don't all have to be in bins. I've done lots of different setups where, yes, some have been in bins. I've done things where I've found smaller bins, like at the dollar store, that can hold task cards, that we didn't need those giant shoebox bins, and I could fit
Mhm.
more smaller ones, or even the iris colored bins that have those. Yep, those ones right there. I would sit that at a table that turned into an independent workstation.
Mhm.
Um, so that was easy enough for me to, put some labels on that so the student could follow the schedule and know which ones to complete. And that was an easy way to get an independent system up and running. File folders are also pretty easy. If you maybe use different color folders, you
Mhm.
can say, okay, first do the red, then the yellow, then the green, and they can do it that way too. And then those are easy to kind of even fold up and put in a drawer and pull them out the next day. And then another option is I've used different rolly carts. So like it's kind of hard to see, but the one right here has like 20 drawers in it.
Mhm.
And that we could actually move around the room as well. So we didn't have to physically have something in the classroom that was stuck to a wall or one specific area. That
Mhm.
we would actually push around to different students around the room to make it work and not have to take up space on the shelves in our classroom. So you can get pretty creative. One other idea I use as well was binders. I would take
Mhm.
binders, and instead of, and you could set it up with tabs, like divider tabs, and each tab was one of the tasks you wanted them to complete. You could do it easily with worksheets that you have. It does not have to be like physical manipulatives that they're
Mhm.
working with. Or I'd use like dry erase materials that they could write on. We could clean it off and then they could
Yeah.
use it the next day.
Yeah, reusable tasks are phenomenal. If you're kind of curious, the structure that we're talking about is related to structured teaching, or if you're familiar with the teach method, you can look that up and get more information of how to set up a structured work system. That's kind of where we're getting here, where there's a certain amount of tasks that you need to do in a certain amount of time. It tells the student a mini schedule to follow. But I think the physical space sometimes is just like, I don't have enough room in my classroom. So I
Mhm.
love your ideas of, yeah, binders or reusable tasks, or task cards, or
Mhm.
even smaller.
Yeah.
File folders you can really squeeze in there. If I need to squeeze in file folders, I think I always used a milk crate with my file folders in it, and it would have colored levels, kind of similar to what you were saying of like blue was like the most basic level, then yellow is a little harder, red is the hardest, or whatever kind of thing. So yeah, those are some ideas there. Hopefully that is helpful. If you have any questions along the way, you are welcome to comment, and we'll make sure to get the answers for you too. Another question that I hear a lot is, what if one of my students even just has a hard time staying in their area or staying on tasks for even like up to a minute, like maybe under a minute, they're just ready to go and moving around the room. What kind of activities can you try with them?
So obviously when we're talking about, the student's ability to work for a certain period of time, we're probably looking at some kind of underlying behavior going on with that, whether it's lack of motivation, the student isn't motivated to complete the work. In that instance, you can implement obviously like a token system or some other kind of behavioral intervention. One of the simplest activities I've found for students that maybe lack that motivation, or maybe it's the activity is too hard for them. Maybe we didn't quite pick the right skill to make it independent for them, would be put in tasks. So put in tasks are when you have something. I think of the easiest one that's most common that most people might understand is like a piggy bank that you put coins into, right? That's something
Mhm.
even in our everyday, like I know as a kid growing up, I had a piggy bank. My own kids have piggy banks in their room. But that
Mhm.
would be an example of we take something and we stick it inside. There's lots of different types of them. You can search put in tasks
Mhm.
and find them. I believe I have a blog post on put in tasks specifically that like names like 10 different types that you can set up in your classroom, but those are probably the easiest ones to start
Yeah.
with students where they're just dropping something inside some kind of a container and they just keep doing it until they've run out of items to put inside of it. And you can get trickier with it. Like think of like your traditional shape sorter that a toddler may have where, a triangle only fits in the triangle, and you can get trickier
Mhm.
that way as well and increase the difficulty as they get good at it. But put in tasks have typically been my go-to when I have a student that isn't willing to stay in an area and work for as long, if we've addressed all those like behavioral reasons first.
Yeah, the other one I really do love is errorless work.
Mhm.
So that is something that is very repetitive. It might be, pick up, put on. I know you say put in. It's kind of like pick up, put on. I need this item over here, this item over here. From left to right or right to left or up or down or whatever it is, where the student can't get the answer incorrect. It's automatic. They do it. It gets reinforced, kind of you said, a token system or something needs to be there, so that they are continuing to understand that this is the routine and the practice of school or the task that needs to get done. Because I think sometimes too, it is a barrier of like teaching them that this is what you want from them and this is what is
Right.
expected of them to come to school. Sometimes our friends don't have whole lot of expectations at home, and then when we come to school and try to put some boundaries on things, it can be very hard. So yes, getting them to attend to a task errorless and put in is usually my go-to as well. Do you have any other tips and tricks for independent work?
I would say that uh, don't think that you're just going to set up this system that you and I are talking about and then it's going to run smoothly.
Mhm.
One of the biggest mistakes I made the first year that I tried to implement one of these systems is thinking, okay, I'm going to fill these containers. I'm going to have an area of the room where we're going to complete this work. It's on the student's schedule, and they're just going to magically know what to do. You
Mhm.
can't do that. It's
No.
just like any other part of your classroom procedure that you would do, task you would ask your students to complete. You wouldn't, not teach your class how to line up at the door. You wouldn't not teach your class how to walk in the hallway. It's
Mhm.
another procedure that you have to teach the students. I know you referenced the teach method, which is the research-based method of using this type of system in your classroom, which that does have very specific procedures that the students are to follow. And I will say that it is a great idea, especially if this is something you're going to start in your classroom with your students, really at any time of the year, but especially if you're going to start at the beginning of a school year, is dedicating some actual time where you walk through the students with them doing what you want them to do. If you expect them to
Mhm.
go get the materials that they're going to work on independently, model for them how do they go get them out of that area. If they're stacked on a bookshelf, make sure they
Mhm.
know to just grab one and not three. Make sure they know that if they pull one, are others going to fall down because they're stacked on top of one another.
Mhm.
Making sure they know where they go sit and complete the independent work. Where do they put it when they're done? All of those different things need to be practiced and
Mhm.
also need to be taught. And then the other question I get a lot from teachers about independent work is how do I know what the students can do independently?
Mhm.
So obviously you can go into any information you have on the student prior, whether it's from a previous teacher or it's from your prior knowledge of working with that student. What can they already do on their own? You can go into their IEP and their present levels and
Mm-hmm.
find out what things they can do or what previous goals maybe they've already mastered and get some ideas. But I also, at the beginning of the year, we would, during that time of teaching the procedures, we would actually kind of do an audit. So when I say that, what I did is I took a ton of bins, we just threw them in the middle of a table. Everybody sat around it. My staff and I stood behind everybody and supported them. And we would just grab a bin, give it to a student, and anecdotally write down if they could do it or not. And then that created a master list for us. Not only did we get the students to practice for those,
Mm-hmm.
getting those procedures, but we also kind of got a master list of what can each student do already.
Mm-hmm.
And then it gave us some ideas moving forward. So that was a great way to kind of do two things at once. And my paras and I we'd all have clipboards. We'd write the student's name down. We write the list of bins that they could do, maybe the ones
Yep.
that they needed some help with for the future, but maybe it was something they could do in a little bit. And then the last tip I have is don't underestimate the power of having a station in your room with a paraprofessional that works there that actually works with the students on the ones that maybe they just need a little more help with to gain the mastery. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's still a task that they need a little bit of support with, but their goal for that para would be to work with the student to get them to be independent. So you could add that task to their repertoire. I had a station in my room where that was that para's job. Once we had the list, and we had the maybe 5 to 10 that were still ones that needed a little bit of help with,
Mm-hmm.
I would tell her to just work with them on those boxes every day. And
Mm-hmm.
until they gained the mastery, that's what they would do. And that was actually a station for a paraprofessional to run, which was very helpful too.
Yeah, I love all of that. And I had a similar setup where like beginning of the year, just task boxes would come out. I would
Mhm.
teach the box and then pass it around the table and see which kid could do it. Great. Next box, let me teach you how to do it. Let's pass it around the table.
Yeah.
So yeah, I remember those days and it was fun for me because then it was like, okay, these are all too easy for this one student. Okay,
Right.
how can I make it more challenging or what can I bring into it? Because they do really surprise you sometimes. So
Yeah.
I love that. Do you have any resources that we can use? I know you said you have a put in blog post that we could read. Anything else that you have that we can get some help from?
Absolutely. So I actually have several blog posts on work tasks on my website, which is teachloveautism.com. And then I do have a lot of materials, whether it's file folders, whether it's task cards, adapted books, some of the materials I mentioned earlier that work really well in these systems. I have
Mhm.
plenty of those created. Those are in my shop and in my TPT store that are available. And then I do have actually a setup um, resource that helps you with the labeling of the boxes so you can set up the schedule that we were mentioning where it has little pictures that
Mhm.
lets you know, okay, it's time to work on box number 5, go find that picture, move it over.
Yep.
So I do have an entire think I call it the independent work setup starter pack or something like that, and it has all those visual supports to get you started with um, getting the materials ready to go.
Awesome. I will make sure all those links are below so that if anybody can find those. And if they have any questions, of course, please, please, please comment below. Jen and I really do love talking independent work. So we will make sure to get an answer for you. And thank you, Jen, for being here.
Thank you for having me.